Imagine a world where cargo ships had to go all the way around South America just to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long trip.
That was the situation before the Panama Canal. It added like thousands of miles and weeks of travel to global trade routes.
It's crazy to think about.
But, lately the Panama Canal has been in the news, but not really for being this amazing engineering feat.
Right.
It's more for the debate about who owns it.
Yeah.
Did the U.S. make a mistake giving it away?
I mean, it's a pretty hot-button issue.
Yeah.
Some are even saying things like illegal heinous act to describe the handover.
Oh, wow.
To really understand this, we've got to dive into all these sources you've provided.
Yeah.
We've got historical documents, recent news, and opinions from, well, both sides.
Yeah, we've got the whole spectrum.
Exactly.
So, what's our mission here with this deep dive?
Well, we're going to unpack the whole history of the Panama Canal,
Okay.
how ownership shifted, and what it all means for the U.S.
Yeah.
And, of course, the world today.
It's a big topic.
It is.
Where do we even begin with something this massive?
Well, the Panama Canal, it wasn't built overnight.
Right.
It actually started with the French, led by Ferdinand de Lesseps.
Oh, yeah. The Suez Canal guy.
Exactly.
Yeah. The mastermind.
He probably thought, hey, we did the desert.
Yeah.
A little jungle can't be that hard.
Right. But they ran into, 3 major challenges.
Oh, no.
Disease was rampant.
Oh,
Thousands died from malaria and yellow fever.
that's terrible.
Then you had the terrain itself. Dense jungles, mountains,
Yeah.
made construction a nightmare.
It sounds like a nightmare.
And on top of all that, they hit financial roadblocks.
Oh, no. The trifecta.
Yeah.
Turns out building a canal through a jungle isn't as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, quite.
So what happened? They just gave up?
Basically.
Okay.
By 1889, they had to abandon the whole project.
Wow.
But that dream of a Panama Canal, it didn't die. In 1904, entered Teddy Roosevelt and the USA.
Ready to take on the challenge.
He was not afraid of a challenge.
No. Roosevelt saw how strategically and economically important the canal would be.
Right.
He negotiated a deal with the newly independent Panama.
So that brings us to the Halen-Varilla Treaty, right?
Exactly.
A big turning point for the canal.
Huge. And this is where things get kind of, well, controversial.
Uh-oh.
This treaty gave the U.S. control of this 10-mile wide strip of land
Okay.
called the Canal Zone,
Okay.
gave them authority to build and run the canal.
So they were in charge.
It was a massive undertaking. Engineers moved millions of cubic yards of earth.
Whoa.
They built huge locks to raise and lower ships.
Wow.
And they had to fight disease, too, remember?
Yeah, right.
Finally, in 1914, the Panama Canal opens. It revolutionized global trade.
Mind-boggling to think about the scale of it all.
Yeah.
And how it changed shipping routes all over the world.
Completely transformed it.
But the U.S. being in charge, it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it?
Not exactly.
Hmm?
As Panama grew as a nation, there were tensions over the Canal Zone.
Oh, I see.
Protests, even riots broke out. People were resentful of the U.S. presence.
So, how did they deal with that pressure? Did the U.S. just ignore it?
Well, eventually, it was clear something had to change.
Right.
In 1977, President Carter and Panama's Omar Torrijos signed the Torrijos-Carter Treaties.
Okay.
This was a pivotal moment. It started the process of handing the canal back to Panama.
So, these treaties seem to be at the heart of the debate now.
They are.
Some people are claiming they were a bad move.
Yeah.
Can we, break down what made these treaties so important?
Okay, so the Torrijos-Carter Treaties were super complex.
Yeah.
They covered everything. Operational control, defense, even the financial stuff.
The money.
The money.
Yeah.
And, importantly, they set a timeline. For the complete handover of the canal to Panama, December 31st, 1999.
What strikes me is that this wasn't just a simple handover.
Right.
It was a whole process.
It was.
With rules about how the U.S. would be compensated.
Yeah.
And how tolls would work.
Exactly. All laid out in those treaties.
Those financial details are important to understand.
They are. The treaty said the U.S. would get payments from the canal's revenue.
Oh.
It was a structured financial arrangement for both countries.
Interesting. So after almost a century, the Panama Canal was finally back under Panamanian control.
Yeah.
How has Panama done with, this huge responsibility?
Honestly, they've done a remarkable job.
Oh, wow.
They've kept the canal running.
Yeah.
They've invested heavily in modernization and expansion.
Okay.
They're committed to efficiency and global trade.
I've read about their extension project. with the third set of locks.
Yeah.
What was the impact of that? Did it change what kind of ships can use the canal?
It was a game changer.
Yeah.
Those new locks, they're for the massive Neo-Panamax ships.
Okay.
They can carry up to 14,000 containers. This expansion, it's had a ripple effect on global trade, especially routes like electronics from Asia to the U.S. East Coast.
So Panama's running the show.
Yeah.
Global trade is flowing. Everyone's happy.
Right.
Or are they? We've mentioned some people regretting the handover.
Right.
What's behind those feelings?
Well, some people in the U.S., they're questioning whether giving up control was a good idea.
Okay.
Their concerns are often about strategic importance, economic interests, and whether Panama's managing it well.
And some of those arguments are pretty strong, right?
Oh, yeah. Some even go so far as to call the handover an illegal, heinous act.
Wow.
It's a very emotional issue for some.
So we've got this historical backdrop.
Yeah.
And a peek into this debate going on now. Where do we go from here in our deep dive?
Next, we'll explore those arguments driving this controversy.
Okay.
Looking at both sides of the coin. We'll look at the counter-arguments.
Right.
And really get into those Torrijos-Carter Treaties, especially the idea of canal neutrality.
It sounds like we're just getting started.
We are. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Panama Canal.
So when we left off, we were starting to look at the arguments about the canal handover.
Yeah.
Things were getting kind of heated,
Right.
with people calling it an illegal, heinous act and worrying about Panama managing this really important waterway.
Yeah, definitely some strong opinions out there.
But let's hear the other side.
Okay.
What are the counter-arguments to those regret claims?
A lot of the counter-arguments, they focus on the Torrijos-Carter Treaties,
Okay.
saying that the handover was legal and that both countries agreed to it.
So it wasn't like the U.S. was forced into it?
No, it was a negotiation.
Hmm.
They also point to Panama's track record since taking control.
Yeah.
They highlight Panama's success in managing the canal, the modernization, and the expansion projects.
So it's not as simple as just taking back the canal, like some people say.
It's way more complicated than that.
There are more sides to it.
Definitely. Some people even think the U.S. should focus on a shared management model.
Right.
Or strategic partnerships with Panama.
Let's break down that shared management thing. How would that even work? Would the U.S. and Panama be, like, calling the shots together?
Shared management is a tricky thing.
Yeah.
It needs a ton of trust and compromise from both sides.
For sure.
The idea is to use the strengths of both countries.
Okay.
The U.S. has security expertise. Panama knows how to run the canal. Combine those.
I see how that could be good.
Right.
But what are some, like, challenges you see with that kind of model?
Well, a big one would be defining everyone's roles and responsibilities clearly from the start.
Okay.
If that's not clear, you could easily have disagreements about strategy, money, even just daily operations.
Yeah, that sounds like it could cause problems if it's not handled carefully. Are there any examples of shared management working well somewhere else?
That's a great question. There aren't any perfect examples that are exactly like this proposal for the Panama Canal.
Okay.
But there are some international collaborations, like with some waterways in Europe where countries manage shared resources.
Okay.
Looking at those cases could give some good insights into what works and what doesn't.
Right. Learn from what others have done.
Exactly.
So, shared management is one idea.
Yeah.
What about this strategic partnership thing? How is that different?
A strategic partnership would probably focus on bigger areas of cooperation,
Okay.
not just the canal. Think things like economic development, trade deals, maybe even environmental stuff.
So instead of fighting over who owns what, they could work together on things that help everyone.
Exactly. They could promote stability in the region, fight drug trafficking, even partner on renewable energy projects.
Lots of possibilities.
Lots of possibilities. It could be a win-win.
But wouldn't Panama worry about any agreement that might, seem like they're losing their independence?
Yeah, you're right.
Especially with the history of U.S. involvement there?
It would be super important for the U.S. to approach any partnership with respect for Panama's sovereignty and really listen to their concerns. Open communication is key.
Speaking of concerns, we talked a bit about worries about China's influence in the region.
Right.
Can we dig into those a bit more?
Sure. Some analysts, particularly those leaning more to the right, they're worried about China's investments in Panama,
Okay.
especially in things like ports. They say this gives China leverage over the canal.
I see, like economic influence leading to political influence.
Right. But on the other hand, Others argue that focusing too much on that might overshadow the fact that Panama has managed the canal really well so far.
Yeah, it's true. They have a good track record.
Exactly. Many on the left downplay the threat from China.
Okay.
They say China's investment is purely economic
Okay.
and doesn't necessarily mean they'll try to control things politically.
Interesting.
They think the U.S. should focus on making existing partnerships with Panama stronger instead of, getting too interventionist.
So different groups see the situation very differently,
Yeah.
with national security and economic interest driving a lot of the debate.
Exactly. But beyond all the geopolitics, how does the Panama Canal actually impact global trade? Like practically.
Right. Let's get down to the nuts and bolts.
The canal's impact on trade is huge.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about shorter travel times. It's reshaped shipping routes. It's influenced prices of things like oil and grain, even the development of whole industries.
Wow, that's a lot of impact.
It is.
Can you give some specific examples of how the canal has shaped global markets?
Sure. Take the grain market. The Panama Canal made it way cheaper to ship grain from the U.S. to Asia,
Okay.
making American grain more competitive globally.
I never thought about how the canal affects the prices of everyday things.
It's a great example of how something that seems far away actually affects us directly.
Yeah.
It's also been great for the container shipping industry. It helps move those big standardized containers all over the world efficiently.
Makes sense. What about energy? Has the canal played a role there?
Absolutely. It allows for the transport of oil and natural gas,
Great.
connecting producers and consumers globally.
So the Panama Canal is this critical link in the supply chains that keep our economy running.
Absolutely. But it also faces challenges like climate change, political instability, and competition.
Yeah, we touched on those. What are your thoughts on those threats?
Climate change is a big one. Rising sea levels, droughts, extreme weather, those could all disrupt the canal and damage its infrastructure.
So what can be done to reduce those risks?
Investing in water conservation is key, especially since the canal needs fresh water to operate.
Okay.
Also, designing infrastructure that can withstand droughts and having good emergency plans for extreme weather are important.
What about political instability?
Yeah, that's a worry too.
In Panama or nearby, could that be a problem for the canal?
For sure. Political turmoil could disrupt operations and even threaten the canal's security.
Makes sense.
A stable political environment and strong relationships with neighboring countries are crucial.
We can't forget about competition either.
Right.
Are there any serious alternatives to the Panama Canal being developed?
There's always talk about other routes, like the Crack Canal in Thailand.
Okay.
It's still just an idea, but if it's ever built, it could challenge the Panama Canal.
So the Panama Canal is super important,
Yeah,
but it's not invincible.
definitely not.
What does all this mean for its future?
The future of the Panama Canal is tied to the bigger picture of geopolitics and how countries get along.
It's a story that's still being written.
Exactly.
And as we've seen, there's no easy answer to these questions about its ownership and what's next.
Right.
But by understanding the different views and how complex it all is, we can talk about it in a smarter way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And appreciate what a marvel of engineering and global connection it is.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive,
Yeah.
from its construction to the handover and the debates happening now.
Yeah.
What's next? Where do we go from here in our exploration?
In the final part, we'll explore potential solutions and different ways to manage the canal so that everyone benefits.
Welcome back to our deep dive on the Panama Canal. We've gone through its history, the controversies about who owns it, and even the challenges it faces with climate change and, the shifting power dynamics globally.
And now, we come to the big question. What's next for the Panama Canal? Can the U.S. and Panama find some common ground? What solutions are there to make sure it keeps running smoothly?
We've talked about sharing management and strategic partnerships, but those seem to come with their own hurdles. Is there a way to balance what both countries want and make sure the canal operates without any hiccups?
It's a tough balancing act, that's for sure. Shared management, while it could have benefits, could also easily lead to, conflicts if it's not clear who's doing what right from the start.
Yeah.
Imagine disagreements about security, how the money's spent, or even just the day-to-day decisions. It might create more problems than it solves.
So maybe starting small is the answer. Instead of jumping into full-on shared management, they could focus on specific areas where working together makes the most sense.
That's a practical approach. Maybe they could start joint training programs for security personnel, focus on shared threats like drug trafficking or cyber attacks, or they could set up a way to share intelligence about potential risks to the canal.
Those sound like concrete steps that could build trust and show the value of working together.
Hmm.
But what if we move away from the canal's security and look at broader areas where they can work together? What could a strategic partnership look like?
A strategic partnership could cover a bunch of different sectors, like economic development, trade deals, or even environmental stuff. Instead of getting stuck on who owns what, they could focus on things where their interests are the same.
Like promoting sustainable development in the region, fostering technological innovation, or even working together on renewable energy projects. Those seem like everyone wins in those scenarios.
Exactly. It's about finding common ground and building a relationship where they respect each other and share the same goals. But let's not forget the potential problems. Panama might hesitate to do anything that seems like a step back towards, the old ways of control, especially with their history with the U.S.
So how can the U.S. make sure they approach these discussions in a way that respects Panama's independence? They fought hard for that.
Transparency and open communication are super important. The U.S. needs to really listen to Panama's concerns and show that they genuinely want to find solutions that benefit both nations. It's about building a true partnership, not, telling them what to do.
Now, let's address the big issue, climate change. We've seen how rising sea levels, droughts, and those crazy weather events threaten the canal. How can they deal with these environmental challenges?
Tackling climate change is a worldwide thing, but the U.S. and Panama can do their part to protect the canal. Investing in water conservation is super important, especially because the canal needs fresh water. They could also look at designs that can withstand droughts and have good emergency plans for extreme weather.
Those are great long-term strategies, but are there any actions they can take right now? Things that can make a difference immediately?
Absolutely. Panama could put in place stricter rules on ship emissions, encouraging the use of cleaner fuels. They could even give incentives to use electric tugboats to move ships through the canal.
It's amazing how small changes can add up and contribute to a bigger solution. We've also discussed competition from other possible routes. How can Panama stay competitive and make sure the canal remains a crucial part of global trade?
Panama's been smart. They expanded the canal so those bigger ships can get through. But they can't stop there. They need to keep investing in the latest technologies to, improve logistics, make operations smoother, and reduce transit times. That's how they'll stay competitive.
So it's all about constantly innovating and adapting to how global trade is changing. What about pricing? Could that help attract more ships?
Absolutely. Panama have to find a balance. They need to make money, but their prices also need to be competitive enough to attract those shipping companies. To do that, they need to analyze global shipping trends, understand how the market works, and adjust toll rates strategically. That's key for success in the long run.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive. As we wrap up, what are the main points our listeners should take away about the Panama Canal and its future?
The Panama Canal is more than just a waterway. It represents human ambition, incredible engineering, and the power of connecting different parts of the world. Its success depends on finding that delicate balance between what countries want and what the world needs. It requires collaboration, innovation, and a commitment to sustainability.
It's been an amazing journey exploring the past, present, and possible futures of the Panama Canal. Any final thoughts for our listeners as they continue to learn about this unfolding story?
The Panama Canal is like a small-scale version of our interconnected world. What happens to it is linked to global trade, politics, and the environment. Staying informed, having thoughtful discussions, and supporting policies that promote cooperation and sustainable development are all critical. That's how we can make sure this vital waterway keeps thriving for generations to come.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.